You are listening to Edvane Stories. Tonight's tale is The 7 Blessings of Cecily Scratcher, Part 2. Friday's child is loving and giving. Frances Short was carried out of St Mildred's by her mother, while Bread Street waited for the next rain to come down. Ailsa Short held her daughter close, the baptism having taken from her what strength the birth had left. Thomas Short walked beside them with one hand near the bundle. The child's head was no larger than his palm, and that smallness had humbled him more than the minister's words. "She has a sweet look," said the godmother. "A loving child, I'll wager," said another. "The world has need of those." At the lychgate, Cecily Scratcher waited in her place, with her eyes fixed on the linen. "What day?" Ailsa looked up. "Friday." The answer brought smiles. Friday's blessing was always welcomed. Loving and giving sounded safe, almost holy. A child with such a heart would comfort her mother, honour her father, and spend herself kindly in a hard world. Cecily said the line plainly. "Friday's child is loving and giving." Thomas smiled, despite himself. "There are worse things." "Yes," said Cecily, "but giving is not always coins from the hand. Sometimes it is marrow from the bone." She looked at Frances, then back to Ailsa. "Friday brought us Cathy Hall." Cathy Hall was loved easily and loved back without caution. Elizabeth said there had never been a warmer child in the house, meaning no more by it than a loving mother would mean. Roger Hall laughed at the way Cathy kissed bruised apples before eating them, tucked crusts near mouse holes, and wept over creatures too small for most folk to trouble themselves with. The first sign came with rosemary. There had been a pot of it by the kitchen window, grey with neglect after 3 cold nights and 1 forgotten watering. Cathy cried over it as though it had suffered purposely, and set both hands around the cracked clay. By morning, the rosemary stood green and sharp-scented, with new tips pushing where dead twigs had been. Cathy slept past the breakfast bell and woke with bloodless lips. After that came a sparrow that the cat had worried and left in the yard. Cathy held it in her apron, whispering nonsense comfort, and the bird opened its black eye. It flew before noon, but Cathy shook until evening. A sickly kitten, all ribs and dull fur, grew sleek after a week, curled against her chest. When Elizabeth took a fever in the summer, Cathy climbed into the bed, despite orders to keep away. By dawn, Elizabeth's skin was cool, but Cathy lay beside her, teeth chattering under 3 blankets. Roger called it chance at first, then tenderness, then God's favour. Elizabeth watched more closely. Mothers know the difference between a gift given to a child and one taken out of her. Cathy did not know how to pity without parting with something. She loved, and whatever she loved brightened. Yet each brightening left her a little dimmer, like a candle asked to warm the whole house. Nicholas Green came into Cathy Hall's life as a boy already half excused by suffering. He was not wicked to look at. That would have made matters easier. He was thin, often cold, often coughing, with the sort of eyes that thanked a person before she had given him anything. His mother had died the previous winter, and his father kept him poorly. Not from cruelty, just weariness, drink, and the common talent men have for calling neglect misfortune. Cathy first sat with him when fever had made him light-headed. Elizabeth sent broth. Roger lent a blanket. Cathy carried the broth and stayed because Nicholas was too weak to hold it properly. "Only a little while," he whispered. "I am less afraid when you are here." She stayed until the light burned low. By morning, his heat had broken and colour had come into his face. Cathy returned home with her hands shaking and slept through the noon bell. After that, Nicholas improved whenever Cathy's pity found him. His cough loosened. A cut on his thumb closed cleanly. A run of bad luck turned. Work was offered, debts were delayed, and a lost coin was found under a sill. He stood straighter, while Cathy began to look washed by weather no one else had stood in. Nicholas noticed before the rest, need had made him watchful. He learned that plain asking did little, but a softened cough brought her nearer. A sorrow half-spoken held her longer than a complaint. If he left a bandage visible, Cathy's eyes went to it. If he said he had dreamed of his mother, she forgot whatever errand had brought her. He never said, "Give me your strength." He had no need of such honesty. "Only sit with me a while, Cathy," he would say. "I am better when you are near." Elizabeth distrusted him. Roger called the lad unfortunate and said charity did not grow by suspicion. Cathy heard only the word better and thought love had answered for itself. Nicholas Green grew stronger over the years. Cathy Hall grew thin. No one marked the exchange, though. That was how it endured. He did not snatch at her, nor command, nor stand over her with cruelty anyone could see. He only came to her diminished and left less so. A cough, a sorrow, a hand pressed too long to his side, a silence shaped carefully enough to invite pity. These were his tools, and they looked harmless in a room where love was praised as Christian duty. Cathy learned to read his weakness as a summons. If Nicholas sat apart at supper, she went to him. If he spoke of loneliness, she forgot her own fatigue. If he worsened when she stayed away, she felt guilt. When she returned, colour rose in his face by morning, and everyone thanked God for the improvement. Her own changes were easier to overlook. Girls were often pale. Work made hands cold. Sleeplessness could be blamed on worry, weather, prayer, womanhood, almost anything but the truth. Nicholas slept soundly after evenings beside her, while Cathy lay awake at home with her fingers numb beneath the coverlet, listening to the house. He praised her goodness often. "No one has ever loved me as you do," he said once, and the words entered her like a blessing. Elizabeth heard them differently. She saw the way her daughter came home hollow-eyed after visiting Nicholas. "You are not bread," she told her. "You are not made to be eaten." Cathy shook her head. "How can love be wrong if it heals?" After that, the signs would not stay small. Flowers turned towards Cathy and opened too early, then blackened at the stem when she passed. Milk warmed in her hands and soured in the cup. A candle burned higher while she prayed for Nicholas, then left her fingertips wax cold. The years passed, and Cathy understood at last when Nicholas no longer looked ill. He stood before her with clear skin, steady hands, and a young man's colour strong in his cheeks. The stoop had left his shoulders. His voice filled the room without effort. Even his sorrow had grown handsome, shaped now into something he could offer and withdraw at will. Yet he said he was afraid. "Only promise me," he told her, "that you will never harden your heart against me." It sounded like love to anyone listening. To Cathy, worn thin by years of giving, it sounded like the last door she must pass through to prove herself good. Elizabeth grabbed her daughter's wrist, but Cathy only smiled, kissed her mother's hand, and went to him. Those nearby saw nothing violent. No cry, no flash of marvel. Only a girl embracing the man she loved, and a man closing his eyes as if comfort had found him. When he stepped back, he looked fully alive. Cathy did not fall at once. She stood a moment longer, her eyes open and gentle, still trying to comfort those who stared at her. Then her knees loosened, and Elizabeth caught her before her head struck the boards. She was dead before Roger reached the door for help. Nicholas wept over her. He wept truly, but what Cathy had fed in him remained alive. Flowers dulled near his hand. Children grew quiet when he praised them. Anyone who pitied him left colder. "Friday's child is loving and giving," Cecily said at the lychgate. "But love is not meant to leave the lover empty." Ailsa Short looked down at Frances. "Teach her to love with both hands," Cecily said. "One open and one kept back for herself." Saturday's child works hard for a living. Benjamin Wright came out of St Mildred's with one small hand already worked free of the linen. His fingers opened and closed, testing the air for something unseen. Bread Street looked fit for labour that morning. Shop shutters were up. A boy carried kindling under one arm. From somewhere nearby came the knock of wood against wood, the scrape of a barrow wheel, the calls of men beginning the day's trade. Sally Wright held her son close, while Zachariah walked beside her with a look of tired pride. "Strong grip," said a neighbour, touching the child's fist with one finger. Zachariah smiled. "He comes by it honest." "A sturdy lad," said another. "He'll never want, God willing, if he learns to work." No one found fear in that. In London, work stood close to godliness. It kept bread on boards, debts from doors, names decent in parish mouths. A child who worked hard for a living sounded like a blessing plain enough for any father to understand. Cecily Scratcher waited at the lychgate as usual. "What day?" she asked. Sally looked up. "Saturday." "Saturday's child works hard for a living," Cecily said. Zachariah looked pleased. "Let him be useful, and the world will find room for him." "Aye," said Cecily, "but mind who's living." She looked at Benjamin's restless little hand. "I well remember Nathaniel Fletcher. He was a Saturday child." Nathaniel Fletcher was useful before he knew usefulness could be a chain. He had square hands early. Give him a bent nail, and he would straighten it against a stone. Give him a broom, and he found the corners other children missed. He could fetch water without slopping half of it over his shoes, stack kindling so it drew properly, hold a board steady while Timothy Fletcher planed it, and remember which tool had been laid where after grown men had forgotten. Susan Fletcher praised him because she loved him. Timothy praised him because the boy made the day easier. Between the two, was room enough for harm to enter, though no one saw it. "Saturday's child," neighbours said, watching Nathaniel carry a sack nearly too heavy for him. "Works hard for a living." He liked the work. He liked the clean rightness of a swept doorway, the small click of a mended latch, the feel of a blade sharpened well, the order that came over a place after hands had served it properly. There was pleasure in finishing. There was peace in seeing what had been crooked made straight. Then the work began to answer him. A cracked beam in Timothy's shed held through a winter after Nathaniel braced it with scraps. A hearth that had smoked for months drew clear once he had cleared the flue. A neighbour's old horse, ribby and dull-eyed, stood another season after Nathaniel rubbed it down each evening and warmed the mash for it. People called him steady, blessed, born to labour. Nathaniel did not merely finish work. Work finished itself around him, and what should have failed held on. Gilbert Stout kept premises off Bread Street, where tallow, rope, sacking, old timber and damp accounts seemed to have settled into the walls together. He was a broad man, heavy in the neck and careful in speech, with a trade that looked sound from the street and tired behind the shutters. His barrels leaked, his shelves warped, his ledgers balanced only if certain debts were not looked at too closely. He hired Nathaniel for common help. There was sweeping to be done, bales to shift, hooks to set, shelves to brace, scraps to cart away. Nathaniel did the work efficiently and without complaint. By the end of the first week, a back beam that had sagged for months sat straighter. By the second, the storeroom no longer smelled of mould. By the third, rope that had been spoiling in the damp hung dry and saleable. Gilbert watched, praised, and said little. "Well done, lad," he told Nathaniel one evening, weighing out coins. "Work sits well on you." Nathaniel was pleased. Praise had always found him through his hands. Yet Gilbert's place had its own hours. After dark, warmth gathered under the floor, though the hearth was dead. Scraps left in a pail were gone by morning. Sometimes tools lay clean on the bench, bright-edged and orderly, though Nathaniel had left them dull with labour the night before. There was a blackened cellar door at the back, its iron ring polished by use. Gilbert kept a lamp beside it, trimmed and ready, though no one ever carried goods below. Nathaniel heard the building settle after long days, not with ordinary timber sighs, but with the low, satisfied easing of something that had been fed. Gilbert heard it too. He only smiled and found Nathaniel another task. After that, Gilbert Stout's place would not let Nathaniel finish. Sweep the floor, and more dust gathered in the corners before the broom was hung. Patch a crack in the wall, and another opened by the counting desk. Carry 2 sacks down from the loft, and 3 stood waiting below, with no man owning up to having brought them in. Rope frayed in the night, barrels loosened their hoops, the pitch on the cellar door sweated in cold weather and dried before anyone admitted seeing it. Nathaniel worked because work was what he knew. He rose before light, came home after dark, ate with his eyes half closed, and slept with his fingers moving on the blanket as though sorting twine in his dreams. Susan Fletcher saw the grey under his skin and begged Timothy to speak. Timothy said steady work was a mercy, and that many fathers would thank God for a son so trusted. Bread Street admired Nathaniel. Gilbert paid him, praised him, and asked for only what seemed necessary. "Just this beam, lad. Just these accounts set straight. Just the cellar stair swept before morning." He never needed to threaten. Nathaniel could not bear a thing left undone. Each unfinished task worried at him like a loose tooth. When he rested, the building groaned. When he returned, warmth came back under the floorboards, and Gilbert's colour rose. The change in Gilbert was plain enough, had anyone wished to read it. His face grew redder, his coat strained across the belly, his trade revived. Men who had stopped extending credit began to do so again. Meanwhile, Nathaniel grew narrow in the shoulders, hollow at the temples, and old in the hands. After a time, he understood that the cellar did not stir most hungrily when scraps were thrown down, nor when Gilbert left the lamp trimmed beside the door. It stirred when Nathaniel took up the broom again after midnight. It warmed when he lifted what no boy should have lifted. It settled, deep and pleased, when he swallowed weariness and found one more task. Whatever lived there had no use for meat alone. Meat was soon done with. A willing hand could be made to begin again. Every mended shelf gave it another day. Every swept board smoothed its sleep. Every errand accepted taught it how to ask for one more. That was when Nathaniel began to learn the worst of it. A living thing can become an idol, and idols do not care what they eat. Nathaniel Fletcher stopped on a night when rain pressed hard at the shutters, and Gilbert Stout asked for the cellar stair to be swept again. It had been swept twice already. Nathaniel stood with the broom in his hand and felt the ache of every task he had ever completed. Below the pitched door, the boards bore a slow inward strain, the weight beneath leaning closer. "Best see it done," Gilbert said. Nathaniel looked at him. Gilbert's face was full and red in the lamplight, but there was fear in his eyes. "No," Nathaniel said. The word seemed too small to matter. Then the floor cooled. Gilbert heard it. His mouth opened. Beneath them, the warmth went out of the boards. Barrels soured one by one, a sharp stink rising through the room. Iron hooks reddened with rust. The ledgers on the desk darkened, the numbers blurring until no debt could be told from payment. At the cellar door, the polished ring began to tremble. "Boy," Gilbert whispered, and there was no mastery left in him. "It must be fed." Nathaniel understood at last. He had not worked for a living. His work had been the living. By morning, Gilbert Stout's premises had folded inward. Men said damp, debt and bad timber had brought him down. Cecily Scratcher said nothing to them. At the lychgate, Sally Wright held Benjamin while Zachariah muttered that a child must learn usefulness. "Aye," Cecily said, "teach him to work. Teach him pride in his work. Let him earn his bread," she said, "but do not let him feed what should be starved." Sunday's child is bonny and blithe and good and gay. Patience Sharp came out of St Mildred's under a clean white cloth, and the faces around the child were easy. Hannah Sharp held her daughter close, tired and smiling. Walter Sharp walked beside them, trying not to appear too proud of what he had been given. "She was born under the best line," said one of the godparents. Another laughed softly. "Bonny and blithe and good and gay. What more could any parent ask?" Even the minister, passing near the porch, did not frown at that. Sunday had a sound of favour about it. A Sabbath birth seemed to carry its own assurance, as though the child had arrived with a blessing already folded in her linen. At the lychgate, Cecily Scratcher waited. "What day?" she asked. Hannah's smile widened with relief. "Sunday." There were nods then. No one shrank from Sunday. No one searched the rhyme for teeth. Walter looked down at Patience and declared that she had been well favoured. Cecily said the whole line out loud. "And the child that is born on the Sabbath day is bonny and blithe and good and gay." The godparents smiled. "This one needs no warning." "Aye," said Cecily, "and there is no heavier burden than being proof that heaven is pleased." She looked from Patience to the listening faces. "Pay heed to the fate of Lucy Turner, also born on a Sunday." Lucy Turner was not a false child, nor a painted little saint set up for neighbours to praise. That was the first trouble. Had she been sullen beneath a pretty manner, or vain in her goodness, folk might have known what to do with her. Instead, she was bright in the ordinary, dangerous way of children who have not yet learned what adults will make of it. She laughed easily. She learned her prayers without being pinched through them. She shared sugared peel with smaller children, carried scraps to old women with bad teeth, and sang to herself while Margaret Turner combed her hair. If Abraham came home worn from the day, Lucy would climb up beside him and chatter until the heaviness left his face. If a neighbour called in sorrow, Lucy's hand would find the woman's sleeve, and somehow the room seemed less mean for having her in it. People noticed. Margaret was praised for raising such a sweet girl. Abraham was told his household showed good order. Women at the pump said Sunday's rhyme had told true for once. Men who would not trouble themselves over most children bent to greet Lucy because her smile made them feel kinder than they were. At first, that was all it was. Admiration, soft and harmless looking. But Lucy's smile did not stay on her face. It spread outward, and every person it touched claimed a little credit for it. Her parents stood straighter when she was praised. The neighbours took comfort in her cheerfulness. A child like Lucy made the parish feel forgiven without asking who had sinned. So they called her Bonny, blithe, good and gay, and each word placed another small weight upon her. Sir Giles Richardson first noticed Lucy Turner at a bread-giving held beneath the church porch, where the poor came forward in silence while their betters stood arranged in decent order. He was a large, careful gentleman, rich enough to be called generous without anyone asking what his rents had cost. His cuffs were clean, his beard was trimmed, his charity came with witnesses. Lucy had been sent with Margaret to help carry the smaller loaves. She gave one to a little boy whose sleeves hung past his hands and smiled when he whispered thanks. That was what pleased Sir Giles. It made the whole proceeding look less like rank distributing crumbs and more like Providence passing through innocent fingers. "A fair little soul," he said. After that, Lucy was asked forward more often. She handed bread to old men, posies to sick women, little books to children praised by the minister, and worn shoes polished for giving. When Sir Giles paid for repairs to the churchyard wall, Lucy stood beside him holding a posy. People smiled to see her there. The poor softened. The respectable approved. Sir Giles looked confirmed by it. "Ah, Sunday child," he called her sometimes, resting a hand briefly on her head. "Little proof of providence." Margaret and Abraham were proud, but also trapped. A patron's favour was not a thing one pushed away with both hands. If Lucy was wanted, Lucy must go. If she looked pretty beside Charity, then Charity looked kinder. If she thanked Sir Giles sweetly, his giving seemed sweeter still. Lucy did not understand the bargain, only that adults became pleased when she stood where she was placed. Sir Giles did not ask Lucy to lie. He only set her where the truth looked kinder than it was. So she learned to smile while bread was counted, while names were marked, while the grateful bowed and the ungiven waited. Ezekiel Lynch did not handle Lucy Turner as Sir Giles did. He had no need of ribbons, baskets, or public gifts. His claim was made from the pulpit, where a child could be lifted higher than any hand could reach. A child born on the Lord's Day, he said, might teach older souls how cheerfulness differed from idle mirth. A glad countenance, rightly ordered, might show what grace had done in a household. People knew who he meant. Margaret Turner knew. Abraham knew. Lucy knew by the way faces turned towards her after the Amen. At first she was pleased and ashamed together. Praise from the minister came dressed in Scripture and sounded harder to refuse than praise from Sir Giles. She sat straighter and sang more carefully. When she smiled after the service, women said Ezekiel had spoken true. Soon, ordinary feeling grew dangerous. If Lucy was merry, people called her blessed. If she was quiet, they asked whether she was poorly. If she frowned, Margaret touched her sleeve. If she showed anger, Abraham spoke of pride before the day was out. If she wept, Ezekiel said temptation often came closest to those marked for grace. If she tired, some neighbour muttered that even good children must watch their hearts. No one meant to be cruel, but that was part of the cruelty. Ezekiel Lynch taught the parish to read Lucy's face as if heaven had written there, and the parish became greedy for the reading. In a year of failed collections, fevered rooms, and quarrels over relief, they needed her brightness more than before. Sir Giles wanted her smiling beside his charity. Ezekiel wanted her steady beneath his sermons. Margaret and Abraham wanted the child everyone praised returned to them each evening without blemish. Lucy learned to arrange herself before stepping outdoors. She could not be afraid without frightening others. She could not be sad without seeming to accuse them. A Sunday child, Cecily said, may be forgiven almost anything but sorrow. Lucy's failing came on a parish afternoon arranged to prove that nothing failed. Sir Giles had ordered bread in neat rows, little books beside it, and winter cloth folded for those poor enough to receive it publicly. Ezekiel Lynch had spoken on cheerful obedience. Lucy was placed near the table, washed, ribboned, and watched. A smaller boy, barefoot in shoes too large for him, reached for a loaf before Sir Giles had finished. The steward struck his hand aside. The child made no cry, only drew back and held his fingers under his arm. Lucy saw it. She also saw Sir Giles continue smiling, Ezekiel lower his eyes to his notes, and Margaret's anxious glance ordering her to remain lovely. The loaf was put into Lucy's hands for giving. She did not lift it prettily. She did not wait for Sir Giles to finish being seen. She went to the boy and set the bread in his hurt hand as carefully as if the whole parish had been made for that one act. "He is hungry now," she said. The room went still. It was not rebellion in any grand shape. It was worse than rebellion. It was plainness. Sir Giles had arranged charity into order, and Lucy had returned it to need. Ezekiel Lynch had dressed obedience as holiness, and Lucy had made holiness look suddenly slower than hunger. Margaret whispered her name once, but not sharply. Abraham stared at the floor. The boy held the loaf against his chest and began to cry, but Lucy did not smile to mend it. That was what shamed them most. When Cecily told the tale at the lychgate, Hannah Sharp was looking intently at Patience. "They called Lucy Turner Bonny and Blithe," Cecily said. "They called her good while she pleased them. But the first time her goodness made them ashamed, they called it pride." Walter Sharp shifted. "Goodness is still a blessing." "Aye," said Cecily, "if it belongs to the child." Patience stirred beneath the linen, screwed up her face, and gave an ugly little cry. Hannah moved to hush her, then stopped with her hand in the air. Cecily nodded. "Let her be good," she said. "Let her be glad when gladness comes. But do not make her answer for God." When the great fire took Bread Street, St Mildred's burned with all its christening linen, its pews, its tablets, its parish boxes, and its books of names. The font cracked in the heat, the bells came down, and the lychgate was left a black mouth of nails and timber. Cecily Scratcher was never found. Some said she burned with the church, others that she had walked out before the smoke thickened. But the rhyme remained, passing from cradle to cradle, with its smile still on. Mothers praised, fathers hoped, neighbours leaned close, and every child was met by hands already eager to turn the blessing into use. That was why Cecily had waited at the gate. The rhyme did not tell what a child must become. It warned what adults might make of them. That was The 7 Blessings of Cecily Scratcher, Part 2, by Jonathan B. Edvane. Discover more at edvanestories.com.